Hello and welcome to today's lesson on the Destruction of Sennacherib by Lord Byron. Now, the first thing we are going to do is we're going to look at some context behind the poet Lord Byron. Then we're going to look at some historical context behind the event that inspired this poem. So Lord Byron was born George Gordon Byron in 1778. He inherited his Lord title at age 10 and became known as Lord Byron in his poetic work. So whenever his work is referred to, it's always Lord Byron rather than George Gordon Byron. Now, Lord Byron is considered one of the greatest poets in history, certainly one of the most famous English poets. So he was extremely controversial for his personal life, which included numerous affairs amongst other scandals. So he is commonly associated with the Romantic movement, which is characterized by its focus on extreme emotion as well as fascination with nature. And we're going to look at the prelude in this series as well by William Wordsworth. He was also a poet associated with the Romantic movement, and again, both poets have a focus on nature to express their ideas. So he fled England as a result of his scandals. There's actually a story that he swam the channel to the English Channel to escape England as the press were hounding him as a result of his numerous affairs. So he fled England as a result of this. And weirdly, he fought in the Greek War of Independence. And actually, the thing about Byron, he had an obsession with well, it was said he had a sort of fixation with standing up for the oppressed. If there was some sort of oppressed minority, or if there was a just cause to be fought, he would fight it. So he actually got himself involved with the Greek War of Independence, and he died of a fever during one of the battles in the Greek War of Independence, and he died and he was just 36. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the context that inspired the poem. So the historical context for the story is that it was inspired by a real event that happened around 701 BC, and it was when the Assyrian king, think about the kingdom of Assyria, is near what we would call the modern day Syria in the Middle East. So the Assyrian king Sennacherib laid siege to the city of Jerusalem, and it was expected that the mighty king Sennacherib and his mighty army would easily crush the city of Jerusalem. However, that was not the case. So during the siege, the inhabitants of the city of Jerusalem cut off the water supply to the surrounding areas. But other than this, there was nothing is known about how the Assyrian forces were destroyed. So it is thought that the Assyrian forces were unsuccessful in taking over Jerusalem, but the circumstances surrounding how they were defeated are very mysterious. So the Bible says that God sent an angel to destroy the Assyrian army. So the army led by King Sennacherib was destroyed by this angel, and that God protected that significant city of Jerusalem. While Assyrian sources don't mention the destruction at all. So from the Assyrian perspective, they don't mention Sennacherib's army being defeated and destroyed. So given the mysterious context surrounding this story, Byron's poem can be read as a powerful attempt to visualize an event that is otherwise very mysterious. So obviously most historians would not agree that an angel of death swept in and destroyed King Sennacherib's army, and that's why Jerusalem was protected. However, Lord Byron almost plays along with that story for poetic effect. And it should be remembered as well that the Destruction of Sennacherib was released as part of a collection of 30 poems known as Hebrew melodies, which were written to accompany music. So the fact that this is um, part of a collection called Hebrew melodies is significant, because obviously Hebrew is the language associated with Judaism. So this is very much championing the Jewish perspective on this event um, of King Sennacherib's army taking over, or attempting to take over, Jerusalem. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is read through the poem before analysing it in line by line detail. For the angel of death spread his wings on the blast, and breathed in the face of the foes as he passed. And the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill, and their hearts but once heaved, and for ever grew still. And there lay the steed with his nostril all wide, but through it there rolled not the breath of his pride, and the foam of his gasping lay white on the turf, and cold as the spray of the rock-beating surf. And there lay the rider, distorted and pale, with the dew on his brow and the rust on his mail, and the tents were all silent, the banners alone, the lances unlifted, the trumpet unblown. And the windows of Asher are loud in their wail, and the idols are broke in the temple of Baal. And the might of the Gentile, unsmote by the sword, hath melted like snow in the glance of the Lord. Okay, so let's analyse the poem in line by line detail. So the first line, the Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold. So remember, the Assyrian, that really refers to King Sennacherib's army that were coming from the Assyrian kingdom to attack Jerusalem, and they came down like the wolf on the fold, and that clearly establishes the Assyrian army as the dominant force. They are the wolf on the fold. So think about a fold of lambs and the wolf just coming down, and it's going to be easy pickings. The wolf is going to devour those lambs. And that's how this conflict was supposed to go. The Assyrian army was supposed to crush any resistance in Jerusalem. It was expected to be a very one-sided affair. Let's look at the next line. And his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold. So this reinforces that idea of the Syrian army's dominance, as they were described in very grand uniform, purple and gold uniform, gleaming. This is a very well respected army, a very dominant army, and almost the connotations associated with purple and gold are one of luxury and wealth. So this was a very well backed army, and it really is setting up the glory of the Assyrian army, and just really confirming to the reader that this army was supposed to win. These were the victors, the victors elect, and they should have swept through Jerusalem, but something happened. And the sheen of their spears were like stars on the sea. So again, this use of a simile, a second simile in this stanza. We had wolf on the fold, and now we've got spears was like stars on the sea. So think about just the sheer staggering magnitude of this army. Their spears, it was like a sea of spears, like stars on the sea. This again, it reflects the sheer numbers involved in the Assyrian army. It suggests that they were very well backed in terms of the weapons they were using. And actually, this is very much to tie it in with the context of the Romantic movement, where ideas are expressed in connection with nature. We've got stars on the sea, so it's a link to beautiful and natural settings, and that's definitely, you can tie that in with the fact that Byron was associated with the Romantic movement. Okay, so the final line, when the blue wave rolls nightly on deep Galilee. So again, it just reflects, and I'm going to keep repeating this word, dominance. This should have been a wave rolling through Jerusalem, destroying everything in its path. But again, something prevents that from happening. Okay, so if we look at the second stanza, like the leaves of the forest when summer is green. So the idea of summer has connotations of happiness, as well as life. So this is an army that has a lot of life. Perhaps also it could even represent the youthful strength of the army, that this is an army in peak physical condition. That host with their banners at sunset were seen. So it's almost like they assumed their victory. They've already got their victory banners out. They're proud that they come from. They're led by King Sennacherib, and they're proudly displaying their dominance through the use of banners. And this, remember, was supposed to be an easy battle. It was supposed to be a whitewash. However, this so the first, it's really important to think about this as the turning points. The first 6 lines of the poem are all about the dominance and the strength of the Assyrian army backed by King Sennacherib. That this is the turning point of the poem. So we go from summer to autumn here, and think about, if summer represents life and strength, well, autumn, as the leaves come down from the trees, that perhaps represents a turning point from life to death. So it says, like the leaves of the forest when autumn hath blown, that host on the morrow lay withered and strown. So we know that something happens to this army. So we go from green summer, leaves of the forest, to these leaves have fallen. Something's happened to this army. And not only that, it extends this by saying that host on the morrow lay withered and strown. So not just that the leaves have fallen, that these leaves are withered and worn, suggesting ill health, suggesting more than that, death and rotting almost. Now, why is this? What's happened to the army? And obviously, we know what's happened to the army because I've already told you when I was setting up the context of the poem. But let's have a look at it in the poem. For the angel of death spread his wings on the blast. Okay, so this angel of death has come along, spread his wings. So he's almost flown over the Assyrian army led by King Sennacherib. Who is the angel of death? So some people associate this with the devil, or you could associate this with Old Testament thinking, where the God of the Old Testament was very fueled by anger and wrath, and if anyone broke any of the commandments, there would be furious retribution for that. So perhaps it represents the fury of God. Obviously, Jerusalem is a particularly religiously significant city, obviously linked to the story of Jesus Christ. So think about this angry God who's going to punish the Assyrian army. So the angel of death comes along. Let's look at the next line. And breathed in the face of the foe as he passed. So the foe being the Assyrian army, and the angel of death has come along, breathed in the face of the foe. So it's just as if by magic and clearly through supernatural force, this angel of death has just killed every single one of the Assyrian army. So clearly this has turned into a deeply supernatural story now. This is no longer just a story of particular war. This is divine intervention here has killed the Assyrian army. And the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill. So this is almost quite graphic language here. The eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chilled. So you think about the Assyrian army almost camped up for the night, and overnight they've just almost turned into wax. They're completely still. in a chilled state, but we almost summon ideas of pale skin, of death, lacking life. And again, it's the complete opposite of the army that were presented in the start of the poem, where you got to where the spears were described, and there was a link to summer and the gold and purple colours of the army. And now, deadly, completely starved of life, and their hearts but once heaved and forever grew still. So again, really linking to the fact that this was a strong army. This wasn't a weak army that was easily defeated. This was a great army that was coming to sweep through Jerusalem like a wolf on the fold. But their great hearts that once heaved with great energy forever grew still. So this is not a temporary thing. They are gone forever, the Assyrian army that were backed by King Sennacherib. And really that links with the title. It's not the defeat of Sennacherib and his army, it's the destruction of Sennacherib. They are completely gone, and the poem takes great pains to emphasize that. And it's not just the humans involved in the Assyrian army that meet a grisly fate, it's also the horses. And there lay the steed, obviously the horse, with his nostril all wide, but through it there rolled not the breath of his pride. So it kind of respects the horse as a grand and worthy creature, but again, grand and worthy creature they may be, but they're no match for a furious and wrathful God who's just ripped through the Assyrian army and their horses. Quite a graphic image in this next line. And the foam of his gasping lay white on the turf. So the horse is not just dead, its foam is coming from the horse's mouth. It was gasping for air, but defeated by this angel of death, and as cold of the spray of the rock beating surf. And it really comes back to that romantic idea, and we mean romantic in the sense of the romantic movement, which was associated with nature. And again, it's using Byron is using a simile here to summon an image of nature to reflect the fate of the horses. Okay, so the next line then, and there lay the rider distorted and pale. So it's captured the face of the horses, now onto the people, the riders of the horses. Again, not just dead, he is almost slightly mocking. The dead are pale, completely starved of life, and their faces are distorted. So their fate is certainly clear in the sense that they're dead, but why have their faces have become distorted? Has this angel of death not only killed the army, but humiliated the army? Okay, with the dew on his brow and the rust on his mail. So we've got quite a lot of references here. We've got rust, we've got dew, we've got distorted, and all of this is almost as if their bodies are beginning to decay. Their glory is certainly faded, and that's reflected by the aesthetic appearance of the corpses. The chainmail, their the what they were wearing has begun to rust. So we carry on, and the tents were all silent, the banners alone, the lances unlifted, the trumpet unblown. So I think this is quite an eerie image here. So the tents that camped this glorious army who were meant to be so dominant, they're all silent. The banners, this was meant to be an easy victory, and they were meant to have a victory party, but the banners are just left. And think about this sea of corpses beneath the banners. The lances were unlifted and the trumpet unblown. So clearly, Sennacherib's army were planning a big victory party, but this never happened because they were defeated by the angel of death. And the trumpets that were going to signpost their victory were never blown. Okay, final stanza, and the widows of Asher allowed in their wail. So Asher is the place where the Assyrian army originally came from. And obviously there's plenty of widows in Asher because the entire Assyrian army have been defeated by the angel of death. So clearly there are a lot of wives without husbands, and they're deeply upset by this, and they're depicted wailing in agony. Okay, so the next line, very religious links that can be made, and the idols are broke in the temple of Baal. So, particularly in the Old Testament thinking, it was particularly sinful to worship idols such as Sennacherib. So anyone worshipping idols, the temples have just been broken as a furious retribution by the wrathful God. Okay, and it goes on, and the might of the Gentile unsmote by the sword. So who are the Gentile? So the Gentile refers simply to non-Jewish. In this case, it is the Assyrian army. And remember, they had a lot of might, because they had a lot of soldiers, and they had all of the weaponry. But they were defeated, unsmote by the swords. They were not destroyed by a sword. They melted like snow in the glance of the Lord. So this is a perfect way of ending the poem, to say that they weren't defeated by humans. They weren't defeated by the power of sword in battle. They melted like snow. And again, simile, and this is, I think, the fourth or fifth simile that we've got in the poem that uses natural imagery. They melted, they disappeared into nothing. Nature and divine power of God destroyed Sennacherib's army at a glance. It was, the word glance suggests it was nothing for God to just destroy an army. Now, the next thing we are going to do is we are going to look at the form and structure of the poem. Okay, so the poem was written in quatrains. Remember, that is 4-line stanzas, and we've seen that in A Poison Tree. Okay, so this enables the story to unfold in a clear and chronological manner. There is actually a lot of poems that you will study are quite abstract in their story. This isn't abstract. It has a clear story to it, and this is reflected by the clear, almost formal form of the poem. Okay, so in terms of the structure then, so the structure comprises of 2 rhyming couplets per quatrain. So it's almost each quatrain is almost, there's a kind of mirror structure to it. So the simple rhyme scheme is deliberate. So Byron wants the reader's attention on the story. So arguably this is why he keeps the rhyme scheme simple and yet memorable. He wants to tell a clear story. So he doesn't want a really intricate form or an intricate structure to take away from the relative simplicity of the story. So this sounds rather complicated, but the meter used is called anapestic tetrameter. Bit of a tongue twister there, but actually it isn't particularly complicated to explain. So the anapestic part of the phrase anapestic tetrameter refers to the stress of the beats. So it goes, so remember I said for trochaic, it goes dum D, so the first syllable is stressed. Iambic goes D dum, so it's the second part of the syllable that is stressed. This actually goes da da dum, so there are 2 unstressed syllables and 1 stressed syllable, and it repeats that, so it goes da da dum. Now, how many times does it repeat that? That's where tetrameter comes into play. So the tetrameter means that the da da dum is repeated 4 times per line. So it goes da da dum, da da dum, da da dum, da da dum. And however ridiculous I sound spelling out that, that's how it goes. And why does he use anapestic tetrameter. Well, supposedly it mimics the sound of a galloping horse. It mimics that dominant force of the Assyrian army marching into Jerusalem, and that's the point of the anapestic tetrameter. Okay, so that concludes this lesson on the destruction of Sennacherib by Lord Byron. Check out the rest of my channel where you can find the rest of the poems from the Edexcel conflict series. Thanks for listening.